need to award one trophy just before lunch, before we go. And as I say, lunch is booked at 1:30, and if you can be back here in your seats by 2:25, so we can have a prompt 2:30 start for the talk, well, the discussion group this afternoon.
Right, we just have a need to award one recipient because they've got a long journey to make and wish to leave at lunchtime. Thank you. So I'm holding the Stuart Turner Trophy, which these days is awarded for social media contributions. And the 2023, this award goes to Clive Lee for being active on Facebook and WhatsApp.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about what you said. I think perhaps we'll need to put some safeguarding just in case it is a very close vote. Yeah, I'm not near that.
Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, anybody in between? Can we take our seats, please? We're about to kick off for the awards ceremony.
Okay. Right, good afternoon, everyone. Brian's going to actually award them. So I'm going to award these trophies in the order I've got written down. And first of all, I just want to tell you that the Montague Trophy, which is for rallies on salt water, has actually already been awarded to a member who couldn't make it today, and it happened that we could get the trophy to him. And that was given to Frank Roslar, who attended both Falmouth and Dartmouth rallies. So maybe we can just cheer him in his absence. Thank you. Right, the next trophy is the committee trophy, and unfortunately this is again awarded to two people that couldn't make it today because they're so active in many different fields, and that is Chris and Margaret Rolfe for their enthusiasm and attending just about everything. And obviously I'll be sending them that. Then we've obviously done the Stuart Turner Trophy, and as we know, Clive Lee was awarded that. Next, we have the Thames Trophy. That's the Thames, isn't it? Yeah. And that for 2023 is going to Ian and Jules Lindsay for all they do to support the Thames Rally. Yes, you keep that. Next, we have the Alex Ritchie Trophy. And a bit of brass. And that's awarded to Keith Doherty for engineering excellence. And now we have this massive award. That's the first that this has been awarded by the Steamboat Association. It is our Martino Trophy. And it is awarded for a boat that steamed the furthest to an SBA rally. And it gets awarded to John, Paddy and Duet. John steamed a long way down the Thames to get to Henley Trad Rally from Lechlade. Well done. Yeah, you keep the brass. We'll work out how you return that. Right, you can talk about that one now. Oh no, is it that one or this one? Oh no, it's that one, that's right. Yeah, you're next, yeah.
Shall I use that?
Yeah.
Right. The George Watkins is actually the winner's chosen by the Heritage Steamboat Trust. It's a duty given to the SBA Trust by the SBA itself. The George Watkins Trophy is awarded for historical research, basically, and we've extended it to include non-members. Now, the last year, if you remember, it went to Peter Green of Alaska. This year, we decided to award it to the French brothers, Chris French specifically, for the two steamboats that were restored. Well, one was restored by Chris French and what's his name? Ivan Fear, who was his engineer. That was Newnham, the original Salter steamers, and the other one was first restored by Ed Langley, but preserved by Chris French. And they're both run as they originally were built by the French brothers, Chris French specifically. There's an interesting tale that Chris French said, "Oh, I know of George Watkins because my engineer kept sending me one of his books for a Christmas present." Anyway, Chris French isn't here at the moment. He was invited, but said he couldn't make it, so we'll pass those on. These are two photographs of the two boats, the two launches, well, passenger launches, which are run by French brothers who are based Runnymede, I suppose, Windsor, if you like. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Next, we call on Kevin to award or talk about the funnel mouthpiece.
Yes, I'm having a senior moment here, folks. The guy who this is awarded to cannot be here today, despite some serious prompting, eventually telling him that he had actually won the award, and he still declined to attend. And when Felicity tells me his name, I'll share it with you. Ah, there we go. Thank you, Gilly. Yeah, Dan has, as hopefully you will all know, been a very prolific contributor to the funnel, particularly with his technical articles and his quirky way of writing, shall we say. So it's much appreciated, and it could be any of you next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, and I'll send it to him.
Thank you very much.
Lovely. And last but not least, we have the Mermaid Trophy, which is a lovely new one. And this is awarded to the Star Boat at Falmouth, which was Artemis, owned by Mike and Susan Phillips. Now, unfortunately, they can't make it either today, but we're calling on Dave Biss to collect it on their behalf and see it safely down the West Country. Thank you. Well done. Could I just ask if there's anybody that's going sort of early before all the discussions, they will need to come and collect the boxes. So is anybody going early for any reason? Because each trophy, as you know, has some quite elaborate boxes. Anyway, thank you. I'll probably carry them back through there, yeah, and have them by the door. Thank you very much. Thank you, Doc. Thank you, Brian. Yeah, I'll clear up later. Oh, it's a photo competition, isn't it? Yeah.
Now the moment you've all been waiting for, the photo competition. I've been asked to judge it this time, and we have
just going to announce
4 winners.
the results of the photo competition.
Didn't I say that? Oh, sorry. So we'll do it in reverse order. 4th is this one, Alan Davis Harrowborough. See here?
Oh, super. You want me to say something?
You wanted the microphone.
No, I was the picture.
Oh, right. Oh.
I'm wearing my jacket notice.
And the 3rd prize is a lovely one of Consuta, with lots and lots of people on it, all smiling, all happy, just enjoying the sunshine and enjoying what's a wonderful boat and a wonderfully restored boat looked after by the Smith family. So that's prize number 3. And it says John Emmett on the back. So John Emmett has won. I couldn't find my thumb over it.
Read it?
I've my finger over it.
I didn't even know I'd entered.
And the 2nd prize is won by Ian Richards, and he calls it Morning Mist on the River Tamar. And it's just a lovely picture of a steamboat ready to go, or just resting. It's a lovely picture. So Ian Richards. Okay. And the winner, number 1, is John Wynne for this delightful picture taken in America. Steve Ross, it says on the back, John Wynne, USA. And it's the 2 boats, one full of smoke and the other full of steam. It just really sums up what we do.
The other thing is, he said, what do I do with 40, well, you won 30 quid last year. He said, what do I do with 30 quid? And I said, well, you spend it on, and he said, I can't do that because we talk in dollars. And I said, oh, don't worry. Mike Bell will sort that out. Do you want the picture? Yes. All right. I'm not used to the paparazzi, hang on. Okay, all right. Yeah, I'm going to start talking. Thank you very much, thank you. That's it, isn't it? That's it, I think. Yeah.
Right, am I still on? Yes. That concludes all the presentations and prize winners and that. And I'd like now to ask Mark Riddell and his little group to come forward for our roundtable discussion. Mark.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, I was going to welcome you, but you're already here, and we're just a fairly select group, so we decided to come down to ground level, not to be too elevated. You know everybody here, I think. Alan Keefe, extremely wide portfolio, including general steam engineering and so on. We've got Kevin Slater. I've never met him before, but we thought we'd better bring him along. Brian Smith, who has extremely long practical experience of steamboating and its history. Brian, you are a walking history. Oh, yeah, I'm afraid you are, a walking history lesson. And you're the owner, too, of a very historic boat, aren't you? So you know about these things. And a father of the SBA, really. Rob Van Ness, sitting here on my right, a long history of steamboating and general crime, and an experimenter, aren't you? So there we go. And we've got Andy Hopper. Andy, I brought along because you actually came in relatively late, didn't you, steamboating? But he's built engines, he's built boats, and he experiments. He's had more boilers in his boat than I've had hot dinners, and more engines as well. And John Wynne, who builds an engine every year, pretty much, a lifetime of intensely practical marine engineering. John, you've got something to tell us, I think, quickly. You've usually got something to say. Say it.
Yeah. Well, so has the session started?
It has now, yes. Right. So just speak into it. Speak into
just it. Speak into it. Is that it? Can you hear me?
Yes.
No,
hold it up.
Oh, all right. Okay. Now then, this is a technical forum. It's very important that you all take note. It's important because you're going to be asked questions afterwards, and you're not allowed to get out the door until you answer the question. So you better listen, and listen carefully. The emphasis was on technical subjects, but I'm going to relate to you one of my experiences in steamboating, which I still have the scars to this day. And it started at a meeting of the SBA when a very important member, Sam Wilkinson, stood up and said, "It's all very well you guys talking technical talk, but remember, you're in charge of boats on a waterway. You should observe the rules of the road and the etiquette of the sea and be careful what you're doing. It's not all about engines and pumps and valves. It's about safety and various things." And he said, if I can get one message to you all, it is please, please, please make sure that your passengers keep their hands inside the boat and not on the gunnels. Because if they're on the gunnels and you bump into a canal boat which is made of metal, you'll crush the fingers. And he said the consequences of that can be devastating. And that sort of stuck with me a lot. And I thought, you know, Sam's right. And Sam would tell us about the right way to put a Union Jack on a flag and the right way to put the flag up and the 3 toots when you go astern and all of this. So he was a big influence on my early steamboating days, because prior to that, the only boats I'd been on were cargo ships to the Far East, weighing a few thousand tons. So small boats on the river was a new thing. Anyhow, enough of that. I built a little boat and I called it Paraphernalia because I burnt paraffin and I couldn't think of a name for the boat. But Brenda, my wife, said, "Why do you need so much bloody paraphernalia for us to go for one day on the river? The car's full of stuff." And I said, well, and then I thought, that's a good name. I'll call it Paraphernalia. I painted it green because that's the only colour we had in the garage at the time. And it was painted green and cream. And it was the most unlikely looking steamboat you could ever imagine. However, it was mine and I used it and off we went. And on one glorious Saturday, I went to a place called Bablock Hythe. Bablock Hythe has a pub called the Ferryman, and it has a slipway nearby. It's not a very good slipway, but it's a slipway. And Peter Trevelyan, the owner, the innkeeper, the landlord, allowed me to use it, and I did. So this gorgeous Saturday, I launched the boat, and for a change, everything went well. And I thought, bloody hell, this is success. I haven't got the toolbox out yet. And off we went, and I went up to the Rose Revived and came back, and it was marvelous. The sun shone, the bird, everything was perfect. Until Peter Trevelyan, the landlord, came down and said, John, he said, I've got some guests here, a couple staying with me, and they've seen your steamboat, and they'd love a ride on it. And I said, oh, that's fine, yeah, that's no trouble. I said, I need a few minutes to get the steam back, but he said, well, they'll come. Anyhow, about 10 minutes later, this couple walked down to the side of the river, and he was dressed smart as paint, new jacket on, all the stuff, obviously a nice weekend away for them. And she was stunningly beautiful, really. She was a Mancunian. She had lovely blonde hair.
John, control yourself.
She had lovely blonde hair, and she had a nice black skirt on, and a handbag, perfect handbag, and everything. And a white blouse, and I thought, oh, this is going to be fun. Bloody smuts of soot getting on her blouse and all that. But we'll try. We'll see what happens. So as we set off, I said, I don't want to be too pertinent about this, but if I ask you to do something, you must do it. Yes, she said, I know all about boats. I've been in boats all my life. I know it. And the husband said, for goodness sake, woman, shut up, will you? And everything I said, she knew better. And I thought, this is going to be fun. Anyhow, one thing led to another, and we went up and turned around and came back in fine style. But I was coming along to the embankment, and she had her hands on the gunnels. And I thought, oh, and I said, excuse me, I said, I'm not being difficult, but will you take your hands off there? And she said, I know what I'm doing. I've been on boats all my life. And I said, and the husband said, do as you're bloody told, woman. And she said, oh, don't you speak to me like that. So yeah, there was the beginning of a domestic, you see. And I thought, this is supposed to be fun. This is anyhow. I got along, and I said, listen, what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a rope on that peg there and a rope on that. When we've done that, you can get up. Yes, she said, I know that. And she then reached out and grabbed the bank. And her husband said, he told you to sit still. But when he said it, he moved to her to pull her back. And the boat went down like that. The boat pushed out, and she went splash. And it wasn't very deep, but it was deep enough. Her high heels sunk into the mud. It just stuck like that. The water, that beautiful white blouse was a light brown colour from the soil. And a black bra was shining through the white thing. and a handbag was full of water. And I died 1,000 deaths. And the publican came down and he said, "For goodness sake, you're trying to drown my best customers." And I said, and then the husband said to her, he said, "Now, for once, will you do as you're bloody told?" And I've never, ever, ever recovered from that event. It scarred me for steamboating, and a lot of you will know, and Chris here, lost him, Chris, he'll vouch for me. I very, very, very rarely took passengers from that day on because I couldn't go through that again. But not a technical issue, but I thought you might be interested in a little light-hearted, and sadly, it was true.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you. Give him a round of applause. So there it is. Steamboating is highly dangerous. We've asked various people what they wanted to find out about from just a panel of, we call them experts, and actually there's a lot of expertise in this room. There are people in the room who should be round here, we know that. But let's just start off with a question which actually came from one of our old timers, Richard Bartrop, who talks about methods of reducing leaks in a wooden hull. He said, "How do you reduce leaks in a wooden hull after a long period out of water?" This was posed to me, he said, by a new member who's just got a boat in this condition. He said, "I hope I made useful suggestions." What would you try to do? I think, Rob, actually, you've had experience with an old wooden boat.
Oh, yes.
There's the microphone. Yes. Just tell us what happened.
Well, yes, I've got a lot of experience of sinking, which usually every April when the boat goes in for the first time, having been in the garage, it never used to be a problem when I had a very old leaking garage and the boat would stay in 100% humidity throughout the winter. However, my new house has got a lovely garage with a damp-proof course and a stone-dry floor, and of course the boat leaks like a sieve the first time you put it on in April. And there's two approaches to it. I mean, one is that you can try to stop the water coming in, but I've given up that fight altogether. And I've now got 3 different bilge pumps, and they all go on for the first run of the season. And between them, they're pumping about 1,500 gallons an hour. And they're going full pelt, and it stays on the water for 2 or 3 hours till the batteries begin to go flat, then take it home again. The next day when I go back, I'm down to 2 pumps working. So we're definitely improving. And by the third day, we're down to just 1 pump and 500 gallons an hour, and that's good for the season. Then off we go. But usually by about August, when it's been in every few weeks, on and off throughout the summer, then it actually is pretty much bone dry. And I'm looking at Dave over here, because at Dartmouth, which is at the end of August, usually I'm fairly leak-free, but I'm always edgy about whether the bilge pump's working or not, because you just live with that. But usually, and by the end of those 3 or 4 days, we're comfortable. But in answer to the question, how do you stop the leaks? You've got to keep the planks wet. You can revert to modern technology, and Sikaflex is a marvelous thing for everything. It sticks your fingers together, it sticks to your clothes and never comes off, but it is a really good sealant for going underwater in the marine environment, and it sticks incredibly well, and it blocks up those rather larger cracks that you can identify by holding a hose pipe against the boat and seeing where the jet of water pops out the other side. And that's the beginning of sealing them, I think, it is to fill them up physically, if you can, and then just get a big bilge pump.
Thank you very much. Anybody else got any insights on that one? Yeah, hang on. Yes, Eckhart, would you like to run? Oh, you've got one. You've got to go.
As somebody
This
who...
is Ian, just introduce yourself.
Sorry, my name's Ian Lindsay. I own Lechlade Marina. We have a lot of wooden boats that live in the marina, some of which stay in the water all year round, many of which don't. A few tips from my experience. First one is go down the slipway with the boat on the trailer, leave it on the trailer, go to the pub for a couple of pints, and then come back. If you've got a very dry garage, we're increasingly finding customers are literally for a week or two before they launch, put old towels in the bottom of the boat, keep them damp, and that tends to sort the problem out. Some of the old tricks really do work. We have people who keep their boats out of the water over winter and then in for the summer. And I still don't quite understand how it works, but putting the boat in the water and pouring sawdust into the water around the boat and on the big gaps, the water very rapidly sucks up the sawdust and seems to stop leaking surprisingly quickly.
Thank you very much. Anybody else got any insights? Yes, John. John, there's a mic there. Yeah.
Right, one of the biggest mistakes you can make, there are quite a few boats which are close seamed. In other words, they haven't got any stopping, and what happens is they will take up and it'll start leaking. Certainly all clinker dinghies do this. You launch it off and it will leak like hell. Don't ever think of putting sealant in seams. Caulk it with water. Eventually it'll take up, and you can do an awful lot of damage by filling a seam which doesn't need filling, and it will close naturally. I'm afraid you've just got to keep bailing for a bit.
Thank you very much indeed for that. I believe, Nigel, you actually lost a boat underwater on one occasion with this, didn't you?
Oh, yes. Well, people will remember the Victorian steam launch Hero.
Keep going. Yeah.
And my late wife and myself used to keep her in a barn near Henley during the winter, and then get the Trevor Green, anybody who remembers Trevor Green, get him to put it in the river at the Flower Pot. And we've been very busy for the winter, and we asked him to launch it just before the traditional boat rally. And so we got there the day before to discover he had launched it and it had subsequently sunk. So I rang up Trevor and I said, "You do realise that Hero sunk attached to the thing?" He said, "Oh, that's strange. That's the third one that's done that this year." Anyway, just for reference, we managed to get it out by asking one of the Environment Agency launches, which actually have huge far pumps. So they have 4-inch, probably 5-inch hoses, and they suck the water out, and we got it up in time for the rally.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Oh, hang on. Mike Bell at the back has got some insight.
Just a quickie. I had an 18-foot national clinker, and all I would do is take it out of the garage in January, February, and let nature do it for you. It rains, and instead of getting water on the outside trying to get in, it's on the inside trying to get out. Yes, you need a bilge pump when you finally want to go, because when it's holding all the water, you've obviously cured all the leaks.
Thank you. And a last word, I think, from John Puddy here.
Yeah, okay, so I have a clinker boat and a carwool boat, and particularly with the clinker boat, I had so much trouble when I kept the boat out of the water in the winter and when I wanted to launch her. So I spoke to an elderly fisherman in the village, and he said, well, it's simple, just pour salt water inside the boat with a watering can. Now, previous to this, I'd used fresh water, and when I converted to using salt water, you just go around with the watering can inside the boat, and because it's salty, it attracts moisture. And I found remarkably, very quickly, the boat takes up.
Thank you very much for that. That's a great answer. Thank you. Well, let's just carry on the same kind of theme. This is from Brian Butcher. Is Brian here? Yeah, he is. I'm making progress with my marine engine, and he sent me a video, and I'm wondering where to put it. More specifically, when I acquire a suitable hull, how can I work out the location to achieve the best available attitude of the boat in the water? Do I need to have the boat in water and adjust? If so, what are the key things that indicate the best position? And is there any analytical way to address the problem without water? Now, we could have some technical answers to this one. I'll give you one very untechnical one. When I built my first boat, which was a disaster in every way and an exercise in how not to do it, I went down and launched it on the Thames and Severn Canal, here, right here, in this area. And I got a friend of mine who, I was much bigger then, I was quite solid, still am a bit, but I was very solid then, and I had a friend who was equally solid. We put the boat in the water, to find actually that it was trying to sink for the reasons just discovered. And, but my friend and I stood in the middle and we embraced each other in a very manly way. And we tried to decide where the boiler should be. And I got various people to take photographs of it. And that's how I decided where the boiler went. It was quite efficient, actually. The boat did sit neatly in the water, but there are more technical ways. Does anybody here have an answer to that? Kevin, I wondered if you did, or Alan.
I would.
It's on, just speaking.
I think you look at the hull and you take the point where the widest beam is, because that's where at the point at which it's going to be the most stable. And in that area is where you would want to put the boiler, because that's the heavy lump. The engine relatively is going to be fairly light, and that can go astern of that, if you think. I have seen the engine put in front of the boiler. You'll probably be somewhere near. If it is nose heavy, then you've probably got to put some ballast in the stern.
Thank you. I think Andy has a comment. Yep, just switch talking.
Well, the only thing I would say is if the boat is going to live on a trailer, you need to think about the centre point of weight of where you're going to be on the trailer. Your boiler is probably going to be the heaviest thing, and that really wants to be pretty well over the wheels. So it starts to limit where you can put the boiler with regard to keeping it all in balance. And I think, as you said, the engine really is usually the lightest bit. It's the boiler and the water in the boiler that's going to influence. And I would have thought it's probably fairly you look at a boat and you think, I think it's going there.
Yeah, I was going to make the same comment. If it looks right, it probably is right, and point you in the direction of the register and just do some research that way. Generally speaking, you're going to want to trim slightly by the stern. I did once visit a cruise ship engine room in Bequia in the Caribbean. Where is she? Very significant to Gilly and I, because that's where we met. And there was a big sign in the engine room saying that the ship had to trim 0.5 metre by the head, and that saved them 10 tonnes of fuel a week. And that was very, very unusual to see that. But generally speaking, you want to aim to trim by the stern a little bit.
And Brian?
It's quite simple, actually. On Michelle and Annabelle, where I had to do those calculations, go back to your A or O level physics, beam and bending moments, and all you do is multiply the weight of the item, like your boiler, from each end of the boat in feet, if you're going to use sterling measurements or metric, and from the other, and that gives you a moment, the fraction, as I say, of weight times distance, and that will determine where it should go and find you the center of the boat, center of gravity in terms of lateral movement forward and aft. And it is quite simple. And if you're then adding a steam engine to it, well, then do the sum for the engine and boiler together to find where the maximum weight between the two of them are. Use that measurement then with the combined weight from either the stern or the bow, and you can balance again. And on both boats, you know, I can remember going absolutely bananas that I put the boat in the water and it wasn't down at the front or up at the stern by even 5 millimeters, both on their initial launchings. And that was, well, that just proved that it works.
Well, in a moment,
beams and bending moments.
Thank you. In a moment, we'll come to you, John. But before that, I wonder if I could ask Brian. You have been involved with new builds, but also you own a historic boat, and you've been involved with Consuta, into which you've had to put other boilers much heavier than the originals. Has that raised any issues for you? Use the mic.
Yes, I mean, weight distribution on a steamboat is very critical, certainly if you're wanting to go with a reasonable turn of speed. And all the boilers that are around these days tend to be rather heavier than they were in the olden days. I must confess, I used a program a long time ago called MaxSurf. I think it was an Australian thing. And that was quite useful because it shows you where the center of buoyancy is and all those other characteristics, and how much down at the head would be if you moved various turning moments. But most people won't do it that way. It depends on the stern on the boat as well, how much it squats. I mean, if you're only going slow, it doesn't really matter. But on a boat like Consuta, at one time, I remember the crew somehow had trouble with the injector, and the injector overflow goes into the floor of the boat on the inside. And they were umpiring, and it was coming along, and my God, it's bow down. Why is that? I mean, it normally has about 6 people in the bow, plus probably half a ton of water in the bow, because it's all... and we pumped it out. I mean, the boat was still going very well, but creating one hell of a wash. But just pumping out the water made a big difference to the amount of wash created on the shore. And of course, we told off the engineer for, why did you do that? Oh, I hadn't noticed. I was getting so excited with the racing. Oh dear. But no, it is very important, the weight distribution. And I think there are a lot of very good ideas so far. Yeah.
Thank you. John, Eckhart, if you could bring the mic to John Puddy. You were going to make a suggestion, John.
Yeah, I think with all vessels, you have to think about the cargo. And the cargo on a steamboat is usually people. And they don't often go on their own. And so when you're considering what's the heaviest thing in your boat, it's usually us. And so you could put the boiler wherever you like, and then you put your passengers in and the boat's out of trim. So I think you have to look as much at as the distribution of the load you're carrying as the position of the boiler. It may well be that when the boat's on a mooring, she's bow down or stern down. That doesn't matter at all. It's just when she's underway, she needs to be a perfect trim.
Thank you very much. I hope that gives you some insights. Yeah. While we're on boilers, another question's come up. This one came from Daniel Hutchinson. People were very good with sending questions in, actually. But he said, a related question which often comes up is, what is the best practice for leaving a boiler between steaming? Many people advocate filling the boiler with water so there's no air. However, in my mind, this is the worst thing to do, as the newly added water will be full of oxygen. Where existing water and steam, especially in a condensing plant, should be comprehensively deionized. What are your insights on that one? I'm going to look to you again, Alan, because this applies to locomotives as well.
I think I'm going to keep well clear of this one because you're getting beyond my expertise.
Beyond your pay grade?
Well, definitely. In my experience, people generally just stop using the boiler and leave it like that. One comes across instances of boilers that have been left for 20 years still with the water in them. They're probably not much good as boilers for that and other reasons, but I wouldn't panic about it, quite honestly.
Okay. Thank you for that. Anybody else got any insights? John, do you have?
Well,
use your mic.
I have to say, Chairman, that I never really worried too much about it because I put a lot of faith into Kevin's water treatment. And
for sale in the lobby.
and I have to say that it's something that I paid. There are 2 people here that helped me on this. One is Kevin, who has the product to sell, and the other one is John Richardson. Are you here, John? Has he gone? John. He advocated buying a set of litmus papers and doing simple tests. The litmus papers you get on eBay, and you get 500,000 for £1 or something like that. And I carried them in a jar, a little jar to keep them dry with a screw lid on, and do a simple test. I never, because my steaming season was quite short, I never worried about it, but I did make sure that the water was in Kevin's. He has 3 stages. He has Guinness, which is too much, he has lager, which is not good enough, and he has mild, which is just right. And that was the colour coordinate. And by and large, it usually was. Now, having said that, I've sold the boat, and I dread the new owner coming and saying, "What a load of bollocks. Your boiler fell apart last week." So I hope that doesn't happen. But that's how I did it. And the John's issue with the litmus papers was my guide. Sorry, John.
Yeah. Over to John.
Yes, I would strongly advocate water treatment, and Kevin's multi-treat TC is really the very best stuff that I've come across you can use in a steel boiler. The only thing I would say is that, as John just mentioned, use your litmus papers and check your pH. If you're in an area where your tap water is pretty acidic and your initial fill up is with, water with a pH of 7 or something, a bit below, you might need to add a little bit of soda washing up crystals, caustic soda crystals, just to keep your pH above 11, in my view. 11, 11.5, I think, and nothing is going to corrode in your boiler at that rating.
Thank you for that. Andy, you've got something to say?
Well, the only thing I'd add is I now run my boat totally on distilled water. In our village, we've got a 20-foot container where all the window cleaners go and fill up their vans with water for cleaning windows. I think I pay about 6p a litre. I just go down, buy 20-litre drums, and I run the boat on that for the year. With water treatment, I reckon that's as good as you're going to get.
Yes, would be.
I live in a very hard water area, and I certainly wouldn't want to use tap water. And I looked at the water coming off our roof, and I don't think I'd want to use that either. Whereas the distilled water for window cleaning is cheap and easy to get. And I would think there's not many villages or towns now that hasn't got a window cleaner refill point.
It's normally called spotless water. It's normally called spotless water. That's the name of the company. And when you register with them, they're expecting you to buy a few thousand litres, and you roll up with a 20-litre drum, and that lasts you all year. But they're very good about it, and it does work.
Can I also mention that some of the practicalities of that might be where you store your boat over winter. I'm fortunate I can store my boat inside a garage attached to the house, so I don't have to fully dry it in all the pipework to prevent freezing problems with a boat stored outside. You probably you get most corrosion at that water-air interface level. You'll see that in sheet piling and rivers and inside your boiler.
It's called the wind and water level, isn't it?
Yes, so it's quite a good idea for that to be at different positions throughout the year. Okay. So you can spread your rate of corrosion within your boiler, and definitely using water treatment can help. I personally top mine up fully over winter and then drain it back down before I use it.
Thanks, Ian. And Brian?
Yes, I mean, you're never quite sure where you're going with the boat and what water you're going to be picking up through an injector or a pump. So it's important to keep the pH at about 11. I mean, that's alkaline, I think. And you can buy pH meters. I think most of the cheap ones are Chinese or were.
Yeah, litmus paper's cheaper.
Yeah, well, I mean, a pH meter, you can use it multi-times, as many times as you like. I've used both, actually. That's when you're operating or leaving it for a short time. If you're leaving it over winter, then my own view is empty it and make sure it's absolutely dry, even if with a bit of heat inside, or even a dehumidifier. I mean, currently, Consuter's actually on the water, the boiler's empty, and I put a dehumidifier on there, and it stops all the brass work going off. It's quite amazing, really. Costs a bit of electricity, that's the only thing. But off peak, you should be okay.
Nobody has mentioned the idea. Oh, I'll come down to you in just a tick, John. Nobody's mentioned the idea of blowing, how often one should blow down. That, I think, is a knotty one. Any insights onto that, blowing down
I think that's actually a different subject. The other thing that we haven't really covered is there is a big difference between puffing and condensing. I think most of the conversations we're having here today assume that you're in a condensing situation where the same water's going round and round, and it's a lot easier to maintain the condition of it. If you're puffing, then you're very dependent on what river you're in at the time. As far as blowing down is concerned, if you adopt the procedure of keeping your boiler empty when it's not in use, and those of us that trailed the boats, that's a good sort of 30, 40, 50 kilos of extra weight that you're not carting around. And also if you blow down immediately, not immediately, but shortly after you've come ashore onto the trailer, you're blowing down whilst the engine is still slightly, the boiler is slightly warm, the engine's probably slightly warm as well, and that in itself will give you that extra bit of drying out. And so that sort of kills two birds with one stone. You've got frequent blow down to ensure that no sludge build up. I did have one query from a guy that we met while we were down in New Zealand, a steamboat called Flirt, which is now for sale at rather a lot of money, I have to say. And he was having problems steaming. He just couldn't raise a decent amount of steam. And in his lack of knowledge, he'd been overdosing, and the tubes were just clagged with boiler water treatment, which was forming a nice big fat skin and preventing the heat getting through into the water. So you can overdo it with the boiler water treatment as well.
Thank you for that. John Dewsbury.
Am I on? Oh, yeah. I am, yeah. I was just to say, Andy, I'm right with you on distilled water, but there is another source for distilled water, which is if you're really looking after your boat and or your workshop and you've got a dehumidifier, all you need to do is run the hose from the dehumidifier to a 20-litre tank, and the dehumidifier, rather scarily, will keep you in water for free.
There's a slight difference in the water there. They're both very pure water, or they'd be demineralized in that context. The benefit of distilled water is it's been boiled, and the process of boiling reduces the oxygen retained in the water. So I'd say distilled is better. I've tried some experiments with this. You said I was experimental. I played about once with degassing water to get the oxygen out completely, to know what I was putting into the boiler. Where I just took tap water and put a vacuum on it and left it. And it appears to be boiling. And there are litres and litres of gas in tap water, which comes off when it's in a vacuum. And after about half an hour, it stops bubbling and you've got all of the gas out of it. Well, trying it with boiled water contains about half the amount of gas that tap water does. So if nothing else, fill up from the kettle as you put water into the boiler. But we talked about condensing plant is probably the majority of that we've been talking about. Of course, once it's gone round the loop once, it's already boiled. And so if you can keep using your condensed water again and again, then that's the best thing. And I think really, perhaps as we come to the end of the discussion on this one, the very worst thing you can do is to introduce tap water into your boiler when you come back in from being out on the water for the day, because that just introduces a whole load of oxygen into that boiler and it sits there for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, doing lots of bad damage. So best thing is to leave the boiler when you come in, blow down, yes, or if you're not going to do that, don't introduce fresh oxygen that's just going to sit there.
Thank you very much, all of you, on that one. Let's talk about fuels. Many of us are very concerned about what we should be burning. I'm just wondering what insights we've got around the table about alternative fuels and the kinds of experiments that you might be doing. Does anybody have anything to say on that one? Kevin, you're involved with boilers in a big way.
Yes, it's still early days with these so-called fake fuels. And as Mark has mentioned earlier, I was the moving force that got the SBA involved with the Heritage Fuels Alliance. And we're a relatively small player in this market when you compare us to the heritage railways, and even the traction engines burn a lot more generally than we do. although according to the Heritage Fuels Alliance, trying to organise traction engine owners is 10 times worse than herding cats. They're very independent-minded people, and they also have to have some strange views on eco credentials. The blacker the smoke, the better, as far as they're concerned. But CPL, the coal merchants in the UK at the moment, have been doing a lot of very extensive experimental work, and their home fire range, and now they have a wildfire. We tried wildfire at Bristol 2 years ago, I think. Some had some success, and John's nodding his head because he did have some success. I didn't. John's boiler slightly bigger than our boiler, so maybe it favours slightly larger boilers and a larger grate area. And I think whilst the Fossifan is brilliant because it's got a high calorific value, it cauliflowers as it burns to give you the maximum surface area. It produces very little smoke and very little ash. It is just perfect. We are going to have to relearn our firing skills to make best use of the products that are available to us now. CPL have gone to Wildfire 2, and if you come to Bristol this year, it's quite likely that you'll get a free sack or two of Wildfire 2. That's a good advert for Bristol, isn't it? But I think that the long and the short of it is we're all just going to have to learn different firing techniques, and the size of the grate, the amount of air that's involved, top air, and all the other variations, the bed thickness and so forth.
Thank you very much. Andy, you want to talk about oil, I think, on this one.
Oh, yeah. I know this is probably heresy to some of you, but as an alternative, of course, with coal getting difficult, a number of us are burning liquid fuels, kerosene, paraffin, or whatever. It would appear at first sight that it's an easy option, but I would say that there are a lot of things you need to consider before you start converting a standard boat with a fire tube boiler over to paraffin. When I built the boat to start with, like most people, I went straight for a coal-fired burner, a coal-fired boiler. And it was successful, except that we didn't like very much the black soot and the smuts and everything that we were getting with it. And the way that we used the boat, which was frequently for short periods and often moving it around on the trailer, I found difficult because you'd end up coming back to the riverside with a red hot boiler and then sticking it on the trailer and trying to get it home, or should I wait for it to cool down? So I made the decision, thanks to John Wynne here next to me, to join the Thames Mafia group, as it was then called, and convert my boat to oil. So I spent a whole 18 months trying to get a fire tube boiler to work on oil. And I can tell you now, unless someone's got a miracle up their sleeve, it wouldn't work. I tried chains down the tubes, I tried deflectors down the tubes, I tried 3 or 4 different burners, and although I could get it to work, I could never get enough steam or control the steam. And the only way that I eventually ended up burning oil was to turn it to a water tube boiler. A lot of expense. I was very lucky. I managed to sell the fire tube boiler very quickly and went over to oil. And I have to say, from my point of view, the way that we use the boat, it's been an absolute joy. We use the boat frequently. It fires up very, very quickly. The cost now is probably not much different to the cost of coal. The cleanliness is very good. We come back to the mooring, or we come back to the trailer, we turn the burner off and we go home. There's no cooling down, there's nothing red hot. We have all the steam we want. And from my point of view, and I think from John's point of view, who was also on oil, as was with Dick Bradford and the whole rest of the gang that used to be based in Abingdon area, it was a good solution. but it's not a good solution to consider turning your fire tube boiler over to oil. I'm just curious, has anyone ever tried it? Has anyone ever converted a fire tube boiler to oil? A stony silence.
Hang on a tick. No, wait, just a tick, John. Are you answering that question or offering something new?
No, I'm answering the question.
I'm answering that question. John again. Yeah.
No, I'm sort of not answering the question, but what I'm saying is that the majority of steamships that were built pre-war were coal-fired. And then at the end of the days, the majority of them were oil-fired. And so they were mostly fire tube boilers. And so that it did work. So it may well be that it needs a little bit more investigation.
Alan?
Going on to the subject of burning wood, and I will come back briefly to the oil. My experience with these things tends to be in railway locomotives, and the firebox of a wood-burning locomotive is approximately half as big again as you would be with coal. So you've got to have that extra heat going in, because the heat value of wood is not as high as it is of coal. You need more fire, and you've also got to have somewhere to store the wood if you're going to burn conventional wood. Now, John, you may know something about this, because the Americans use wood a good deal, don't they?
Suffice to say that it's not unusual for a 25-foot boat to have at least 6 to 8 feet of it full of timber before they set off for a day's steaming. And it is quite a, they get oak logs and birch logs and all that. They split them up and they stack them and they squeeze as much wood as they can, because they just eat the stuff. They have tall stacks, as you will see from the photograph. They have tall stacks, big fire grates, and it's marvelous. They work brilliantly, but they're feeding the fire all the time. And Alan's right, they're bigger grates, bigger flues, and they use a lot of wood, but successfully.
On the subject of oil, which John Putty was talking about, conventional boilers have been converted to oil. Probably one of the bigger proponents of this has been the Fistinio Railway, where they did convert almost entirely to oil. In fact, they were burning waste oil from people's cars. Their volunteers were bringing waste oil up for them. It can be done. It's quite complicated. There are firms who make the kit, but again, it's not for the faint-hearted, perhaps.
Okay. Yes, down to John. Oh, yeah.
I was just going to say, often we're not viewed as being environmentally friendly, as we have clouds of black smoke coming out of our funnels that we try to avoid, and not very pleasant. But I found I'm moving away from coal and burning wood a great deal with these associated problems. That wood, kilogram for kilogram, if you get good quality hardwood, is similar to coal, but of course it's much less dense. So you've got to have a few dumpy bags full, perhaps for a day out. But talking to people on the quayside and our public image is that when you say, well, actually, I'm carbon neutral and I'm burning a biofuel compared to those petrol things down there that are stinking, they suddenly nod and smile at you. That actually it could improve our image. Of course, I've got coal on the boat, and when I'm away from the quayside, I put a couple of shovels on, because I don't want to be getting up and down every 5 minutes, putting another couple of logs on the fire. But it's nothing to be afraid of, burning wood, and in my coal grate, it actually works. As long as I've got nicely chopped oak, then it works very well.
Where are you getting that from at a reasonable price?
Well, I go and find it myself.
It's all right if you own a forest, yeah. Yeah, the interesting thing, I first was exposed to oil firing when I did Frederick Bush Pluto, which is the boiler there is an Alex Ritchie copy of a Lithu boiler. And actually, I don't know if a lot of you know, but what Alex Ritchie actually studied, his specialist subject was combustion. So he'd got that sorted.
So looking at it, you've got a domestic style pressure jet burner that you would get for a house or an office central heating. And they work extremely well. I had oil-fired central heating for years at home. Obviously what happens is you get a jet of flame out of the front of that burner. So some boiler geometry will work very nicely with it, and others won't. So when I did my boilers, the 3-drum one is basically a Yarrow style. If you put a pressure jet burner in the fire door, it fires straight across onto a blank area that doesn't have water tubes on it, bounces back, swirls around, rather like the LiFu one, ideal. It just happens to be. If you've got the 2-drum boiler, then your tube bank, your fire door is opposite, you'll be aiming straight at the tubes. That style of boiler, which is very good for economy, ease of construction, is probably not the one you'd choose if you were going to go for oil firing. You'd go for something equivalent to my 3-drums, which is a Yarrow or a Thornycroft. The LiFu boiler is in fact a Thornycroft boiler rather than a Yarrow. And the difference is that the Thornycroft has the tubes discharging above the water level in the steam drum, and hence it needs downcomers because it won't circulate. Whereas the Yarrow just said, keep it simple, keep all the tubes straight, don't need any downcomers, and it works very well. Okay. I'm a fan of Yarrow, you know.
Thanks very much, then, John. That's great. Nigel wanted to say something. We'll just pass the mic back to him. Yeah. And then it's over to you, Andy.
3-drum boiler, final.
Thank you. I've been using compressed sawdust logs, very similar to the same as the ones being used by Alaska in a loco boiler. It works perfectly well. The downside is it takes up about 30% more room. The advantage is it's very clean. There's no coal dust getting all over your clothes and so forth. So that's an advantage. The final thing is it actually smokes just as much as any badly fired coal. And the smoke which is produced doesn't smell as nice as coal, which you get the traditional boat people with their twin 200 horsepower Caterpillar engines belching out diesel, complaining about the smell you're making. But it's perfectly, it has disadvantages and advantages.
Thank you very much. Andy?
Yeah, I'd come back to what John was saying. The downside of using the commercial Riallo type burners is that, yes, they do send a jet straight down. Of course, if you've got a round pot type boiler, shooting it in the fire door ain't going to get you anywhere. It's just going to go straight across the boiler. It's not going to work at all. Whereas a pot burner, where you put a pot underneath the boiler with the flame shooting upwards, is a better option. It still, I think, from my experiments, means that a fire tube boiler is very difficult to make it work. But a water tube boiler, like the Oldfelt boiler, which is what I've got now, works absolutely fantastic with a pot burner. We don't need big current draw for a Riallo. I mean, Riallo burners are pulling about 20 amps, 12 volts. So, you know, you're carrying big batteries around. Whereas a pot burner, you're pulling 1.5 to 2 amps on a little fan. And I say, absolutely fantastic. No smoke, no smell. I mean, when John and I used to cruise together, we used to almost test each other to produce nothing. And we could go for hours and hours cruising with not a whiff of smoke coming out the boiler, not a whiff of smell. You agree, John?
Indeed, yeah.
Loon Valley boilers were designed as oil-fired boilers, and they are a particular style. Obviously, their burner down at the bottom is ideal. If you want an efficient boiler, copy Loon Valley. In fact, a lot of the time, and certainly I'll copy anything, is the boiler designs I've come up with, nothing original from me. I've just looked at history and what worked historically and say, how can we make this cheaply and easily using modern materials? Obviously, we've got a big advantage now. We've got this thing called welding, so you can make quite complicated shapes without being a master riveter. That's the way to do it. But the Loon Valley one, there's a lot of data in the archive stuff in the SBA, which I've got, and I go through it very, very carefully. And one of the companies actually gave factual information on the evaporation rate of their boilers was Loon Valley. And if you look at it, as you would expect, their larger models are more efficient than the smaller models. You would almost expect that. And people say, oh, I've got a boiler, it'll evaporate this much. And you say, you're talking absolute rubbish. Have you tested it? Have you actually steamed your boiler, measured the weight of your condensate that's come through? It's just folklore. And folklore is very dangerous. Because once it's accepted as folklore, everybody says, oh, this boiler will evaporate this much. And you say, why are you saying that?
Okay.
Got no proof.
Thanks very much. Roger, you wanted something to say, I think.
Well, sort of experiences on puffin. Puffin was fitted by my late father with a Babcock boiler by Max Scott, and originally supplied with a 4-jet pressure jet burner, which ran on paraffin. And that was extremely successful, worked fine, until paraffin became hard to get hold of. And as soon as you started looking at kerosenes and things like that, she'd soot up and block the jets and became a real pain in the bum, to be honest with you. And it was, again, John Wynne who said, you ought to try a pot burner. And so the next thing I know, John's got the materials. He's got Ian McAlpine machining it all up, and he's make the stainless steel welder welding it. And within a few weeks, I had a pot burner, which I fitted in, took the old jet burner out, put the pot burner in, and it didn't work that well. And the next thing we noticed was it was burning the floorboards, either side. Which made me think and worry about this, and went back to an old article I'd read in Funnel. And that was that effectively the volume of air being pushed into the boiler, once it's been through the burner, is expanded by about a ratio of 10 to 1, something like that. And what the problem was that although the funnel on puffin would work with the pressure jet burner and would work fine, as soon as you put a pot burner in and blew a lot more air in, the funnel wasn't big enough to take the volume of gases, and so it was pushing out the bottom and burning the wood on the floorboards around the edges.
Well, thank you.
Literally, I increased the funnel up to, I think it's now 7-inch diameter. Put that in, and it burns fine. It never smokes, well, very, very rarely ever smokes. It's normally only just on light up. And once she's lit, you don't see any smoke at all coming from her.
Okay.
Kerosene, heating oil. Yeah.
Can I just ask Brian, if I could pass you the microphone, Brian. With Consuta, a very traditional, very historic boat with a big locomotive boiler, you can really only burn coal in that, can't you? Or are you experimenting elsewhere?
It depends on what you're wanting to do. I mean, you've got two sorts of boilers. Those that will run on natural draft and those that are running with forced draft, if you like, puffing up the funnel. I mean, Consuta obviously is forcing up the funnel. I've got sand toy, which it runs on natural draft. Consuta, to get 100 horsepower out of the size of grate, needs a type of fuel that will really burn red hot. And some of the best coal actually is anthracite, but it does take a bit of lighting. But the Fossifran was probably as good as any because its volatiles are low. We've currently tried Polish, which is pretty good. That's the only thing, it smokes. Now on the Thames, the one thing you mustn't do, especially going into a lock, is to smoke. The sand toy, it doesn't matter. I mean, it really doesn't, because it's not a fast boat, and the burning temperature of the coals is very low. So really, if you're using solid fuel, you need to decide what sort of power you're going to get out of a certain size of boiler or a certain grate size. The size of the grate determines the power. I think that was a Bullion thing, wasn't it? Well, maybe you all knew it, but Bullion sort of pumped it around, didn't he?
Well, let me stop us there. Some people will have experimented with different kinds of grate. I mean, the rose grate, for example, which is one full of holes, tapered holes, enables a fire to float a little bit over the top of the grate in a way that it can't over bars. I wonder, Alan, is anything being experimented with your various locomotives?
Not that I'm aware of. I think the locomotive people are even more traditional than we are here. I suppose the big thing that does get experimented with, and again it's a product of the fuel, is the gap between the fire bars, as to whether you're getting enough draft up through to burn whatever fuel it is that you're using. Beyond that, I can't tell you very much, because I don't think anybody's doing much about it.
And nobody seems to be, you'll have heard of LD Porter, a locomotive engineer who experimented with top air. John, did you have any insights on this?
Yes.
Pass him the mic, there we go.
Yeah, great. So, I mean, I've used gas, I've used oil, I've used coal, I've used eco. And I think what we've got to think about is all we actually need is heat. I don't think we need to be precious about solid fuel at all, because that's becoming more difficult. I think we sort of have to move forwards with the time, and we hope that steamboating will continue long after we're gone. And the potential is that diesel fuel would be very difficult to get in just 11 years. So we really have to think out of the box on how we're going to continue. So the e-coals, I think, are a really great way forwards for solid fuel boilers, and certainly the e-coal that we used in Bristol. And I think it's coming down to the size of the grate, the technique. On a boat, that's much easier, but on a road engine, it's a nightmare because you're shaking around all the time, and all the e-coal wants to do is to turn into dust. So that's another issue that has to be faced. In terms of boilers, the Liffey, which is a great, beautifully designed boiler, and of course what Liffey did was they designed the boiler and the burner in the same way as Loon Valley. They designed the burners and the boiler. Another good boiler for an oil-fired boat is an Illingworth, and that's again a vertical boiler with vertical spiral tubes. So I think there's no single answer, but I sort of feel we should just think about the heat, not be precious about solid fuel. Running a boat on gas is a dream because you just turn it on and off. By far the easiest, and at the end of the season, the tubes are as clean as the day you lit them on the first day. So it's really sort of thinking out of the box as we go forwards.
Okay, just one final speaker, Ian, over the back there.
I'm involved in a number of British Marine Federation committees and meetings, and there's been a very big new international report called the ICOMIA report about future fuels. And that has come out very, very firmly that in the future, small boats are almost certainly to be best fueled with alternative liquid fuels, not electrification. When you look at the whole life cycle, battery power and getting rid of existing boats and putting new engines in is awful compared to drop-in modern fuels. There are huge strides being made in the HVO fuel, which is the hydrogenated vegetable fuel, the government are changing the rules on taxes to make it equivalent to diesel and to sort out the discrepancies on boats being able to use it for heating as well as propulsion. But just to pick up the last speaker's view of diesel is going to become more difficult to get, actually almost certainly in boats, drop-in alternative fuels are the future. And so for people looking at alternatives, you might actually find that moving towards liquid is easier and has more long-term future than you might think.
Thank you very much for that. Let's wind that bit of the discussion. We're getting very near to the end, really. Our time is nearly up. I want to say thank you to our panel. Thanks for all that you've done. I've got one more question, a bit of a fun question. One of our members here, Alan Keefe, a few years back, produced a wonderful small boat with steam electric propulsion, a bit reminiscent of an early steam turbo liner, a P&O liner, wasn't it? Sort of Oriana, except he used a Merriweather boiler, a Stuart Turner S driving an alternator, and a powerful American outboard, but it was a steamboat. There was also once, back in the 80s, a Frolic 21 on the Thames called Turbo Puffer. Some of you might remember this, which used a basic form of steam turbine with a propane-fired boiler. The turbine was a sort of vane motor, I think, designed originally as a compressor, but it went like a rocket. The only snag was that when the owner and builder died, his wife was sort of talked out of the boat by a couple of white boys who bought this thing very cheaply, wanted to get more performance out of it, and they screwed the gas cylinders right down and got a huge amount of propane out, so much so that it said that they set fire to one of their anoraks and they dived overboard, and the boat subsequently burnt out and sank. So you know about all this. And that actually made it very difficult for me when I came to get my first gas-fired boat through its test. John, what were you going to say?
You might find this interesting. It's nothing to do with steam, but it is to do with boats. And one of the leading lights in the Stirling Engine Society is a guy called Andrew Hall. Now, following Alan's idea, Andrew Hall has invested in a commercial Stirling engined power unit. It gives him about 1 kilowatt. It's run on propane gas, and it's brilliant. It's silent, it's automatic, it's efficient, but it costs £8,000. However, he equates everything, Andrew equates everything to the cost of a membership of a golf club. And he says, well, many people spend that on a golf club membership. I'm spending it on my hobby. And what he's done, and it is clever and it's worth looking at, similar to Alan, he has an electric outboard motor. He has a portable gas tank, which he uses Schrader fittings to connect to and from, and he goes to the local garage and has it filled with propane. And then he has a very substantial battery, not in terms of electric boat type batteries, but a good quality battery. And then, leaving the jetty, he switches the electric outboard motor on, similar to Alan had, and off he goes. But the instant he starts off, he lights up the microgen Stirling engine power generator. And in 5 minutes, he's got power. And he's calculated that if everything's in balance and it's working well, he can do 5 miles an hour and it will run comfortably for about 10 days on one filling of gas.
John, we need to wind this up actually.
Okay.
So, yep.
One downside, there's only enough room for one passenger, but that's another story.
Just a very quick, then it's over to Roger. Yeah, far away.
You've got similar problems. I've actually got a very small boat at the moment, which is gas-fired, And one of the problems with gas, to my mind, is actually allowing for leakage. I've hung a small gas cylinder over the back, and that's fine because anything dissipates. Going back to what I did with the steam electric, as Mark rightly said, the snag with that was actually the Merriweather boiler, which was designed for steaming out bombs and that sort of thing, was designed to steam very quickly, which it did. You had steam in 20 minutes, but it got no reserve in it. So if you started to lose either pressure or water level, you were knackered, shall we say. And you then started running on the electric only, and it was almost impossible to get steam back again, however big a fire you put in the boiler.
Thank you very much. Roger, give us a final word. Yeah.
Just a slight extension about what you said about turbo puffer.
Yeah.
The final failure happened because it turned out to be a casting fault in the gas regulator.
In the regulator.
The chap Alan Beach who ran it, he was a technician at the fire research station. And when the insurance company said it was lack of maintenance, he took these bits into the fire research station and had them all analysed. And it was a casting fault in the original gas regulator that was supplied by Callow or somebody.
Well, thank you very much. Dot, we can wind this up, I think. Can I say thank you to all of you for being prepared and for all of you for sharing in this. Thank you.
Sure. You've already done it. I was going to suggest that I'm sure you would all like to thank Mark and his crew for a very informative and interesting discussion group. And that concludes it for this year.
Thank you.
See you all next year.
Indeed.
I hope.
Thanks very much, everyone. That's great.